The Battle of Hürtgen Forest is often remembered as just another fight in the push to Germany. But for the U.S. Army in late 1944, this forest became a slow-motion trap, one that ate time, strength, and momentum right as the Allies were racing a calendar they couldn't see. The stakes weren't only the trees or the villages. Behind them sat the Roer River dams, structures the Germans could use to flood the valley and freeze any Allied crossing at the worst possible moment. And here's the twist. The Hürtgen wasn't a single battle with one clean objective. It was a chain of decisions, each one made to solve a problem on the map, until the forest itself became the problem. By the time the fighting spread from the northern edge toward Schmidt, the real question wasn't, how do we win here? It was, can the Allies afford to keep paying this price, right before the winter changes everything? Module 1. By September 1944, the Allied advance had slammed into a different kind of wall. The dash across France had stretched supply lines thin, and the German border defenses, what Allied soldiers called the Siegfried Line, were no longer a rumor. The 1st U.S. Army, operating in this sector, faced a strategic dilemma: push directly toward the Roer River and beyond, or first secure the flanks and the terrain that could threaten the entire advance. That's where the Hürtgen Forest enters the story. On a map, it sits southeast of Aachen, a rugged, densely wooded region cut by steep ravines, narrow roads, and small villages that become hardpoints the moment artillery ranges in. The forest wasn't just inconvenient terrain. It was terrain that punished modern armies. Radios struggled, vehicles bogged, evacuation slowed, and every resupply run became its own operation. But here's the first open loop to watch. The Hürtgen fight begins with one logic: reduce a threat on the flank, keep German forces pinned, protect the Aachen effort, then shifts toward another logic entirely: the Roer River and its dams. That shift is subtle at first, and it matters, because it changes what success even means. The American medical history of the campaign describes the forest fighting as one of the most costly and controversial American operations in the European War, stretching from September into December. It also underlines how many formations cycled into the grinder: the 1st, 4th, 8th, 9th, and 28th Infantry Divisions, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, and armored infantry and armor elements supporting them. Now zoom in on what the commanders were trying to do. The First Army needed to keep pressure across the front. Aachen was a major objective to the north, and the broader plan, Operation Queen, was building toward a push to the Roer River as a gateway to the Rhine. In that context, the forest looked like a place you couldn't ignore, a pocket of high ground and cover that could conceal German formations, interfere with lateral movement, and threaten the flank of any drive east. So the early logic is understandable: clear the forest, reduce the risk, and keep the offensive timetable moving. But here's the twist: the Hürtgen is not built for timetables. It's built for attrition. In the first phase of fighting, units attack into a landscape that strips away advantages. Tanks can't maneuver off the few roads. Artillery fire is harder to observe. Infantry has limited visibility and constantly loses orientation. The Germans, defending from prepared positions and exploiting mines and obstacles, can force slow, costly advances even when they're under pressure elsewhere. And because everything is slow, everything becomes predictable. The more predictable you are in the Hürtgen, the more the defender can set the rhythm: registered artillery, pre-sighted machine guns, mined approaches, and counterattacks that don't need to be large, just time to hit when units are exhausted and reorganizing. Keep an eye on the cause and effect loop forming here. Every delay increases the need to make up time. And the need to make up time pushes commanders toward repeated, narrow assaults, exactly the kind of approach that the forest punishes most. By November, the battle's intensity rises as the campaign's priorities tighten. Operation Queen begins in mid-November 1944, aimed at breaking through to the Roer. The forest fighting becomes tangled with that larger offensive. If the Roer is the next line, the approaches and the dams behind the forest start to matter more. This is where Schmidt becomes a name with gravity. Schmidt is not a metropolis, it's a small town on commanding terrain. But it sits on an axis that points toward the Schwamenauel dam system. And in this sector, the dams are not just engineering features, they're weapons. The official U.S. Army history of the later campaign explains why. The Germans could destroy or open dam gates to flood the Roer Valley downstream, washing out bridges and isolating forces that crossed at the wrong time. What makes this so dangerous is the timing. The Allies are not only fighting the Germans. They're fighting the season. Winter weather reduces air support, complicates ground movement, and magnifies non-battle losses. The Ahmed history tracks that reality through the casualty picture, combat wounds, exhaustion, disease, and injuries, showing how the forest doesn't just cost lives, it degrades divisions as instruments of offensive war. And here's the uncomfortable question. If the Roer dams can halt an entire army group's crossing plan, why are American units bleeding in the forest before the dams are even in hand? Part of the answer is that the objectives evolved faster than the battlefield reality. Early operations attempt to clear zones, seize villages, and push lines forward. But the forest turns each limited objective into a prolonged struggle. The result is a rolling commitment of divisions, each one inheriting the same terrain problems plus the wreckage left by the last one. The 28th Infantry Divisions fight around Wassenach, Kammerscheid, and Schmidt, often grouped as the Battle of Schmidt, becomes a symbol of that pattern. The Ahmed history notes that the 28th lost more men in the forest in early November than any other division engaged there. And this is where the attrition trap closes. Because when a division takes heavy losses in an environment like the Hürtgen, the losses aren't merely numerical. Cohesion breaks. Veteran small unit leaders vanish. Communications fail more often. Plans become more rigid because there's less capacity to adapt on the fly. The forest amplifies the cost of every mistake and reduces the payoff of every success. But here's the twist. By late 1944, the Hürtgen isn't only an American problem. It's a German opportunity. German commanders understood two things. First, the forest was the perfect place to trade space for time without losing prestige cities. Second, time in December mattered more than time in October. The longer the Allies stalled and bled, the more freedom Germany had to shift forces, prepare reserves, and preserve key terrain for what came next. At the same time, American commanders faced a real operational risk. If they bypassed the forest and drove to the Roer, and the Germans manipulated the dams, an entire crossing operation could be disrupted. The official history is blunt about this later lesson. There was a growing realization of the dam's importance, and air strikes failed to neutralize them. So the forest fighting continues, but the logic changes under the surface. The battle becomes less about clearing the flank, and more about controlling the conditions under which the Roer can be crossed. And this leads us to the cliffhanger. Because by the end of Module 1, the U.S. Army is staring at a dilemma with no clean answer. Keep pushing through the forest and risk burning out divisions in the worst terrain imaginable? Or pause and risk that the dams, the weather, and the German defensive system will freeze the offensive anyway? Mini cliffhanger, end of Module 1. In early 1945, the American command will call the Roer dams the most vital task on the entire front, because until those dams are secured, a major river crossing plan can't safely begin. But to reach them, the army has to go back into the same woods that already bled it white. And this time, the clock is even less forgiving. By late 1944, Hürtgen Forest has become more than a battlefield. It's a system of delays. The U.S. Army attacks into terrain that breaks communications, slows armor, and turns evacuation and resupply into daily crises. Multiple divisions rotate in, take heavy losses, and struggle to translate tactical gains into operational momentum. Meanwhile, a second threat grows behind the trees: the Roer River dams, structures the Germans can use to flood the valley and sabotage the timing of any Allied crossing. Now the question isn't just how to fight in the forest. It's whether the Allies can seize the dams before time, and winter, seize the initiative from them. And here's the twist: when the dam problem finally becomes impossible to ignore, the operation to solve it is shaped by the scars of everything that came before. The official U.S. Army history of the later Rhineland fighting explains the dam system in practical terms. Multiple dams regulated the Roer and its tributaries, with the Erft and Schwamenau among the largest. If the Germans destroyed structures or opened gates, they could flood low-lying terrain downstream near towns like Düren and Jülich, washing out bridges and isolating any Allied force that crossed at the wrong time. This mattered because crossing the Roer wasn't an abstract arrow on a map, it was the gateway to the Rhine. And major operations depended on reliable bridging, stable supply flow, and the ability to reinforce across the river. Flooding didn't have to be dramatic to be effective. A steady, controlled release could hold the valley in a state of unusable mud and water long enough to break an offensive schedule. So by early 1945, dam seizure becomes a strategic requirement. The story's turning point is not a single firefight. It's a decision to make the capture of Schmidt and the Schwamenauer Dam a priority objective tied directly to the timing of the Ninth Army's ability to cross the Roer. In the official history's account of February operations, the V Corps commander tells the 78th Division's commander that capturing Schmidt and the dam is the most vital task at that time, because, until the dam was in hand, the Ninth Army dared not cross the Roer. On-screen quote, short, attributed, was the most vital at that time on the entire Western Front. Until the dam was in hand, the Ninth Army dared not cross the Roer. U.S. Army Official History, The Last Offensive, Office of the Chief of Military History, 1973. Notice what that quote implies. The Hürtgen isn't just an ugly fight, it's a gate. And the person holding the key isn't a village mayor or a bunker crew. It's the dam system itself. The February push aims to break the stalemate with a clearer operational purpose. The official history describes how earlier attacks through the Hürtgen, September through mid-November, had been launched toward the general direction of the dams but with other objectives in mind, and they were stopped short. Airstrikes failed to breach the dams. A December ground attack aimed specifically at seizing them was cut short by the Ardennes counteroffensive. So the February effort returns with heavier focus and a tightening timeline. Units move to secure corridors, villages, and approaches, because you can't assault the dam without controlling the high ground and the road network leading to it. Schmidt's terrain value becomes undeniable. It's essential for reaching and holding the Schwamenauer Dam. And once the Americans finally fight their way into that decisive zone, another reality surfaces. The Germans don't need to destroy everything to succeed. They only need to manipulate the situation enough to delay the crossing window and force the Allies to burn more time, more bridging resources, and more manpower realigning. But here's the twist. When the dam objective is finally within reach, the fear isn't only enemy fire. It's whether the Germans will trigger the water at exactly the moment it hurts most. The official history's description of demolition efforts underscores that engineers on the ground were aware of the danger of sudden destruction, and German actions could produce flooding effects designed to stall Allied mobility. That anxiety shapes how the assault unfolds: careful movement, heavy engineer presence, and a constant race between tactical progress and the threat of an engineered delay. Now step back and look at the cost in human terms, without turning it into gore. The Ahmed history gives a sober measure of the campaign's impact. Divisions engaged in the Hürtgen Forest suffered over 30,000 casualties across killed, wounded, missing, combat exhaustion, disease, and non-battle injuries. This is what an attrition trap does. It doesn't only remove soldiers. It drains the resilience of a force at the exact moment it needs to be at peak capability for major river operations and winter fighting. So why does this battle still matter, beyond the grim numbers? Because the Hürtgen reveals a rule of war that commanders relearn repeatedly. Terrain can become a weapon when it shapes logistics, communications, and decision tempo more than firepower does. In open country, superior mobility and combined arms can recover from mistakes. In the Hürtgen, mistakes harden into weeks. The forest forces operations into narrow corridors, turning each village and ridge into a forcing function. It also makes support fragile. Tanks can't always follow, artillery observation is limited, air power is grounded by weather, and casualty evacuation slows precisely when casualties rise. The payoff, the outcome and legacy, lands in three ways. First, operational payoff. Securing the dam threat becomes a prerequisite for safe, large-scale Roer crossings. Whether the dams are intact or damaged, the point is control, removing German ability to decide the timing of the river's flow. Second, campaign payoff. The battle's delays and losses shape how the Allies approach subsequent winter operations. More emphasis on logistics, engineering, and the hard arithmetic of how many fit infantry units remain for the next phase. Third, historical payoff. The Hürtgen becomes a cautionary case study in objectives creep, how a mission that begins as secure the flank can evolve into seize the dams, while the environment imposes costs that outpace the original assumptions. And the most sobering twist is this: Hürtgen's story isn't just about what happened in those woods. It's about how a modern army can be forced into slow, grinding choices by terrain, weather, and infrastructure, until the battle becomes an argument with reality, not just an enemy. 2 to 4 sentences, story-based, plus comment prompt. The Hürtgen Forest is a reminder that the most dangerous weapon can be a decision, especially when it locks an army into terrain that multiplies every cost. If the Roer dams had been the true key all along, which moment mattered more? The choice to keep pressing through the woods, or the later shift to make the dams the priority? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more stories where strategy, terrain, and engineering collide, please like, share, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episode. Video description: Battle of Hürtgen Forest. Why the U.S. Army's 1944 push turned into a brutal attrition trap. Hidden stakes, the Roer River dams, and the decisions that slowed the march to the Rhine. In this documentary-style World War II history breakdown, you'll learn how the Hürtgen Forest fighting, 1944, collided with Operation Queen, the Siegfried Line, and the Roer River dams, where terrain, weather, mines, and logistics punished every advance. We follow the campaign's shifting objectives, why Schmidt mattered, how U.S. divisions rotated into the forest, and how German defensive planning turned delay into strategy, revealing the turning points that shaped the winter campaign and the road to the Rhine. In this video we cover where the Hürtgen Forest sits on the Western Front map, why the Siegfried Line made the border fights so costly, why U.S. commanders feared a flank threat near Aachen, how forest terrain disrupted radios, armor, and artillery spotting, the villages and ridgelines that became must-take objectives, why Schmidt became operationally decisive, how Operation Queen changed priorities in November 1944, the Roer River dams as a strategic flooding threat, why airstrikes couldn't solve the dam problem, how winter conditions magnified non-battle losses, what the campaign cost in manpower and momentum, the battle's legacy as a lesson in objectives creep and logistics. Sources and further reading: U.S. Army Center of Military History, CMH. The Last Offensive, 1973. Hyperwar, CMH text. The Roer River Dams, The Last Offensive, Chapter 4. Ahmed Center of History and Heritage. The Fight for the Hürtgen Forest. National Archives, NAR, Record Group 407, Combat Interviews / Hürtgen Forest Materials, via Ahmed References. U.S. Army Center of Military History, Rhineland / Siegfried Line Campaign Publications Catalog. Imperial War Museums, IWM. Western Front 1944 Context, Collections and Overviews. U.S. National World War II Museum, Western Front and Ardennes Context Resources. Bundesarchiv, German Federal Archives. World War II Holdings and Unit Records Guides. Encyclopedia Britannica, World War II Western Front Reference Entries. Westwall, Siegfried Line, Museum Sites and Regional Historical Archives, Eifel / Rhineland. This video is a historical summary, sources listed above. If this deep dive helped you see the Hürtgen decision chain more clearly, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Which objective mattered most, the forest or the dams?